This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we begin this morning on slightly strange territory. Look, contempt of court laws are pretty strict and generally pretty clear. There is some wiggle room. There always is with the law. That's why we have lawyers. If there wasn't any wiggle room, you wouldn't need lawyers, would you? You'd just have it all handed down from on high and we'd know exactly where we stood and what we could and couldn't do. So we can't talk about the case that has prompted conversations about armed police. We can't talk about the specific case. We can't really say anything about it, except oddly, that the Home Secretary has done on Twitter, which to my untutored eye, to my amateurish eye, looks at the very least to be profoundly unwise and very unprofessional. But we're talking about Suella Braverman, so there are perhaps no surprises there. The question really of what armed police are unhappy about, however, is much broader than a single case, much bigger than a single case, and I'm interested, frankly, in what is going on, because the idea of the police officers to whom we entrust an awful lot, actually, these are the people most likely to be coming up against armed criminals, and there's a debt of honour, a debt of gratitude there that I'm afraid has to transcend. And I know it's easier for perhaps a white bloke to say this than some other members of our community, but that has to transcend some of the criticisms and concerns about the police in general, which are greater, I think, at the moment than at any point I can practically remember in my life. But they do deserve our protection. They deserve our respect and support in many ways, for the same reason I would argue that firefighters do. You know, nobody's perfect, nobody's infallible, everybody needs to be held to account. But there are life choices, there are career choices that involve more danger, more personal danger than the rest of us routinely face. And I think that there is a sort of commensurate debt from society to those people. I don't know how this reaches your ears, by the way. It's a very personal perspective and perhaps a slightly sentimental one. It's not exactly objective. I reserve a different attitude to public servants in general than I do to other members of the workforce. But when it comes to particularly the emergency services, if you like, then for all the problems and all the scandals that we've endured in recent years, I still have an emotional relationship with people who risk their lives to protect ours. I just do. Or people whose career decisions have been made according to looking after the rest of us, which allows us to bring the health service into this sort of broad brushstroke. So all of that is background really to the decision by a number of officers to, and I think the language is to hand in their cards. In other words, to hand back their weapons, effectively speaking, as a consequence of one of their number being charged with murder. It means the Ministry of Defence could be stepping into the breach and replacing armed police on London streets for the first time in over 100 years. Now, I am, and the people answering the phones today will have to work even harder at this than I do, but I am stressing repeatedly that this is not a conversation about a specific case. It can't be, because that would bring us straight into contempt of court territory. But it is, except to say that a colleague has been charged with murdering an unarmed black man, as the Daily Mail chooses to report it this morning. And as a consequence of that, officers have handed back their weapons and essentially withdrawn themselves from active duty. I'd like to start by asking why. 0345 6060 973. Now, that is a question to which answers will need a degree of expertise and experience which I do not have. So let's guard against that. The idea that the police should be held to somehow lower standards of scrutiny than the rest of us is one that I would reject. But it's also perfectly possible that they are currently being held to higher standards than is fair or reasonable. Just because they've handed in their guns doesn't mean they're in the right. But equally, just because they are police officers and members of a particularly controversial section of the police doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong. So why have you or why have they handed in their guns or your guns? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060973. So that kind of admits the possibility that we don't know enough about the current situation to have an informed conversation. I think we probably do, that the broader conversation is about what should happen when a police officer shoots somebody. You know, there was a terrible case, I think before I even started working here, which was a million years ago, a bloke shot dead carrying a table leg through London because someone had reported that it might be a gun. I don't like, and I'm afraid with Suella Braverman in the Home Office, I wouldn't put anything past her when it comes to populism and, for want of a better word, epic thickness. It's a terrible thing to say. It's a terrible situation to be put in. I'd go so far as to suggest that she's even worse than Priti Patel, which is not a phrase I ever thought I'd utter. But here we are. So with her in the Home Office, formerly an Attorney General, by the way, her CV boasted, I don't know if you're aware of this, a little nugget from my next book, but it's in the public domain. Her CV boasted about having contributed to a legal textbook. And when the author of the legal textbook saw this on her CV, he made it public that she hadn't made any contribution at all to the legal textbook. This is all we know, really, about her career as a lawyer. And the help that she'd given to the author amounted to doing some photocopying. So I don't want this to be a lazy conversation. I don't want it to be a binary conversation. Police good, therefore can do anything. Police bad, therefore should all be in the dock. But I do have a problem with, and that's why I've mentioned Suella Braverman, with a subcurrent, an undercurrent of this conversation that seems to be the police should be able to shoot people without any more questions being asked. I've got a deep problem with that for two reasons. Number one, it's ugly, just on an objective level. And number two, and I've heard some other conversations about it this morning, it seems to me that people's opinions are often driven by the question of how likely it would be that they'd find themselves on the wrong end of that bullet. And when that is the case, you're going to bring in everything from socioeconomic class to ethnicity to geography to, well, you name it. But I, as a middle-class, middle-aged white man, do not feel at any risk whatsoever of being erroneously or illegally shot dead by a police officer. Maybe I'm being naive, maybe I'm not. But I can imagine other sections of our society, other sections of our community who are as blameless as me in most contexts, being rather less confident about that happening. So I just want to guard against this question being answered according to who and what the respondent is, rather than what sort of society we want to live in. Yeah? I think that's really important. Do you want to live? How much scrutiny and investigation should a police officer face when they shoot an unarmed citizen dead? Up to and including a murder charge, theoretically speaking. The numbers you need are 0345 6060973. Then we've got a question about how we feel about armed police, armed soldiers routinely policing London streets, something that we haven't seen in over 100 years in this country. It's kind of scary, isn't it? I mean, we don't see armed officers very often, so we probably wouldn't be bumping into armed soldiers on a regular basis, but you know, you do occasionally encounter them, and to see soldiers in uniform with guns on the streets of London it's a strange image, isn't it? So we made do a little side order of that as well. But the number you need in the first instance as to what is going on here, and can we together navigate it in a way that avoids that little pitfall I just described of having a response to the question of armed police shooting unarmed civilians that is framed really by either consciously or subconsciously the question of how likely you are to be on the wrong end of that bullet. 0345 60 60973. We live in a society where almost everybody paid to comment upon social issues is immensely privileged and very much divorced from the reality of people on the receiving end of those social issues. I mean, most obviously with poverty. Is there any more hideous sound than that of a well-heeled pundit questioning the existence of poverty or denying the existence of poverty? The notion of people who come to the end of their spending money long before the end of the week or the end of the month, and there is literally nothing left, whether it's for food or shampoo or nappies. There is literally nothing. So it doesn't matter whether it's 10p, 20p, £1, £5 or £10. There is nothing left. And you can open a newspaper on pretty much any day of the week and find the people like me who are paid to offer our opinions on issues in the news just absolutely incapable of understanding what it's like to run out of money, what it is like to have zero spending power until the next cheque or the next payment arrives. And I don't want that to happen here. I don't want this to be a conversation that is conducted entirely according to how likely you think you are to be shot, or your loved ones are to be shot dead, despite not being armed, by a police officer who is not supposed to shoot people who aren't armed, but who in the course of discharging their duties will inevitably run the risk of doing so. And that's a risk that society has to accommodate, not just the individuals concerned. All right? It's 10:15. You know the number. The phone lines are open, and it should be interesting, this, not least because I don't think if we all put our brains in gear, I don't think there are obvious answers to any of these questions.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 10 is the time. So what is going on and what should be going on are questions which really we could apply to almost every topic we discuss together. Just insert the details and the facts of the specific case. And of course, the specific case that prompts the conversation about armed police and indeed prompted or has prompted armed police to hand in their tickets, effectively to hand in their guns as a colleague faces murder charges, is a case to which we cannot veer near. We can't go anywhere near it. I cannot make that clear enough. Thomas is in Bury St Edmunds. Thomas, what would you like to say?
Hello, how are you doing?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
So just a few points to make. First-time caller, I've listened to your show quite a lot.
Thank you.
The first one I want to say is I 100% believe that the police and armed police or normal sort of working police should be investigated when these sort of incidents do occur. I'm currently serving in the armed forces, and I know, should I be out on operations, if I discharge my weapon, I will be investigated just in the same way that the police would be.
Possibly even more so, because you've got the Geneva Convention to worry about as well, haven't you?
Well, yeah, it's always there. There's always training, always reminders. Carry cards with us to ensure that we have the exact verbatim word of the law on our side as well. Obviously, I'd say that, you know, armed police and the armed forces, they run parallel, but they are different in many ways as well.
Yes.
The police's first job is always to 100% try and diffuse the situation at all costs. Whereas, you know, there could be slightly different rules. The second part I'd like to say as well, I don't mean to sort of call you out on anything. Very respectfully.
Feel free.
You said on the sort of intro to this question, this would be the first time in over 100 years that the armed forces have been out with police. During the Olympics and after the Manchester bombings at the Ariana Grande concert, I have been out patrolling large cities with members of the police, helping to police during these sort of high.
Yeah, I think I misspoke there. It's the content. The context would be replacing armed police as opposed to supplementing or complementing armed police. So that's where the line of the first time in over 100 years comes from.
Oh, okay. That could be a misunderstanding on my part.
No, I think it's probably a misspeak on my part. But can we stop being so polite? This is a radio phone-in show.
I should just start yelling abuse at you down the phone.
Thank you. Exactly.
But as I mentioned before, I believe that obviously I'm speaking to you as a sort of white cisgendered male.
Right. Yes.
So I'm in a similar situation to you, where perhaps we are less likely if we found ourselves in that sort of situation. Whatever may happen, but I still wholeheartedly believe that any action anybody takes, whether you're police, armed police, whether you're in the armed forces, whatever, if you put somebody else's life in danger or perhaps take that life, you should be investigated, because to make that decision, you must be able to sort of prove why. You must be able to give reasoning as to why, otherwise you wouldn't be able to make that decision in confidence.
So the officers risking their lives to keep us safe have my full backing, and I will do everything in my power to support them. They mustn't fear ending up in the dock for carrying out their duties. That's the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, speaking, and it's strange to say the least that there is, to me at least, some clear blue water between what you've just said and what she appears to be saying in those tweets.
Well, I think to say that, if you should, perform the act, or if you should do something like that, you shouldn't expect to be able to explain yourself, I think is roaming into really quite dangerous territory of where, I can do what I want and no one can investigate me for it anyway. So why don't I just make my life easier and do what I want? I think we could end up in very, very murky water if we were to say, armed police can respond to an incident and don't have to fear any sort of court time.
Well, as someone who routinely wields a weapon in the course of your duties, I'm more comfortable with you saying that than me just as a gob on a stick sitting behind a microphone. But I'm seeing it similarly, and that phrase there, I mean, it doesn't seem very carefully chosen language. They mustn't fear ending up in the dock for carrying out their duties. But what if they have gone beyond their duties, or what if they have acted in a way that can't really be accounted for according to duties? That is essentially what these conversations are always about, and that's why the CPS imposes the same criteria on police officers that it would impose on anybody else when deciding whether or not to pursue a prosecution or press charges. Thank you, Thomas. I don't know. I'm not confident I nearly said as a trained journalist, but I don't think I'd get away with that, would I, with you? But I'm not confident as a journalist, as an alleged journalist who has received legal training. I'm not completely clear about what I can and can't say about what the Home Secretary has said about a live criminal case. That's how mad it is that she's waded in her size 4s in this fashion. I'm not sure what I can, if I were to be really careful, and I always want to be, and I'm expected to be, I don't think I would have been able to say what the Home Secretary has said, which means I'm a little bit nervous about repeating what the Home Secretary has said in this context, which is just a mark of how mad everything is. 25 minutes after 10 is the time. Hannah is in London, which is a suitably vague description that makes me think the first thing you're going to tell us is your qualifications for commenting on this issue.
Right, yeah, correct, James. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I am a retired ex-firearms incident commander.
Gosh.
Have worked in London and also in the north of England.
Right.
Keeping it very vague because I also have a very close relative who is a current serving firearms officer.
Okay.
So although I have been retired a while, I would feel I do have my finger on the pulse slightly.
Clearly.
As to what training goes on, accountability. So fire away, what do you want to ask? And hopefully I can answer it for you.
Why have the cards been handed in, as you understand it?
I would suspect, and I'm, again, only reading between the lines,
yes.
To be a firearms officer, they go through an extremely rigorous training process. It is drilled into them the implications of of what will happen, very similar to what the army officer just said.
Yes.
What will happen if they pull the trigger? The same when I was an incident commander. So an incident commander is the person who puts the firearms or authorises the firearms officers to be in that position,
right,
to ultimately use their judgment as to whether to effectively take somebody's life. That is the ultimate. They know that inside out, back to front. They're through their training, very similar to military. It's drilled into them. Pulling the trigger is the last thing they want to do. They have systems to escalate, de-escalate. It's the last thing they want to do. There will be something, we know not what, that has triggered them, excuse the pun, perhaps not quite the right word, to go, that wasn't in line with what our expectations would be if we were put in a similar position. And the implications for those officers and their families, yes, they know they will be scrutinised. They expect all of that, quite rightly. We're not America. We do not want to be America. But there will be something behind the scenes, and we do not know what, which will have made them very cautious. And what the last thing anybody wants is when they are in that situation, that split second of indecision and doubt could cost them their own lives, or members of the public.
So
exactly.
You, for people not understanding fully why we're conducting this conversation in such vague terms, you can't speak specifically about the case that has prompted this response from officers in MO19, but your contention is that it will be very specific to circumstances in which MO19 currently finds itself. This is people who know a lot more about it than we do, arriving at conclusions based on what they think they know.
Yes, and that is the only logical thing I can see, given all my specific training, which, granted, may be out of date now, and the training that I know from a current firearms officer. I've also spoken to people who have pulled the trigger, who have and I know what the debrief looks like, how this lives with them for years. But we need them to be confident in doing their job to protect us, the public. And if they are not confident, they don't have to do this. The pressure.
But these decisions are taken by the CPS, and the stress of a case notwithstanding, nobody can really argue that the Criminal Prosecution Service shouldn't have a role to play in these sort of circumstances.
No. Absolutely not, and we will not know. Again. Ultimately, there will be a trial, and that is correct. There will be, again, information that has gone to the CPS. They don't take these decisions lightly.
Well, precisely.
And they will have made their conclusions based on the evidence that was put to them. Then it will be put to a jury, and quite rightly, a jury will decide whether this was murder or not. That's the legal system, and I actually don't have an issue with that. It will come. It will be concluded eventually, and the facts will come out.
Then we come back to confusion about why the officers have taken the action that they've taken in the interim. Then, and I don't think either of us can go any further than that, can we?
No, and they won't take that decision lightly.
No, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Because they undergo so much training, and you have to be a certain type of individual to want to do that. I never wanted to hold a gun. I never wanted to point it at anybody. I took the more about the decision. And the rationale that goes behind it, the documentation, the justification, and quite rightly so. I don't dispute what
I get that, but for balance, for want of a better word, the Baroness Casey, and that report was only published in March of this year, well-resourced with elitist attitudes and toxic cultures of bullying, racism, sexism and ableism. Normal rules do not seem to apply or be applied in MO19. Junior ranking officers and trainers hold disproportionate power in their relationships with senior officers because of the importance of their blue card firearm status to Met operations. I just mentioned that because it's pertinent, and I know you weren't sort of engaging in hagiographies of every officer who carries a gun, but we need to be reminded that everybody's human.
Correct, and please do not, as an ex-Met officer, I started my career in the Met, I will just say I am, as an aside issue, I am gobsmacked about what's going on in the Metropolitan Police. I cannot understand or justify what is going on there. I can't speak for the Metropolitan Police. There may be issues going on there. Please let's not tar every firearms officer or everybody you see with a gun.
Quite the opposite. No, I completely agree.
Yeah,
I'm late for the news. That's the only reason that I'm moving on. I wanted to hear everything you had to say, and I wanted to bring Baroness Casey's report into the conversation because it seems to me that, should we say, the less thoughtful members of my profession, members of the British media writing and commenting on this today, are in complete denial about the existence of the Casey report when it comes to the state of the Met and some of the issues pertinent to this conversation in particular. But I guess the deeper your prejudice is, the more important it is never to let the light in. And thank you to Hannah for bringing so much light to this conversation. It's 10:32. Lottie Morley has the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:36 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, you'll have noted the quality of calls so far, but I have to tell you that Jake and Ella, who are answering the phones today, are dealing with people who apparently didn't hear me explain why we cannot go into any of the details of the case of the man who died during a police operation in South London last year. That's all I'm going to say. And I except to repeat that I'm not clear what I can and can't say about the Home Secretary's intervention on this issue, because I think she might have flirted with the contempt of court. Just apropos something else that I mentioned to you about, because you may have noticed a sort of career crisis kicking in a bit in recent weeks when I talk about what happens in this profession, in those of us lucky enough to get paid for our opinions, and how many people don't seem to feel any sense of responsibility to understand basic facts. So talking about poverty denial, which seems to be coming back into fashion at the moment, the pensions and the Money and Pension Service, MAPS, which I think is a quango, did some research towards the end of last year that found 9 million people across the UK have no savings at all, right? And another 5 million have less than £100. So that's 14 million people who have either no savings at all or have less than £100. So the idea that there are millions of people in this country who cannot buy essentials if an unexpected demand upon their money is made in a given week, month or day should not really confuse or baffle anybody. There is no excuse for not understanding those very, very, very basic numbers. So it's a quarter of adults have less than £100 put away. So if you need a new tyre on your car, if you're somehow able to run one in that way, or if you need to replace a broken window, or if you need, God forbid, a boiler or something like that, the idea that you... Well, anyway, I don't think I need to explain it any further. 10:38 is the time. Back to the handing in of cards, a sort of downing of weapons, metaphorically speaking, by many, many armed officers. The first time since 1919 that policing roles across the capital could be undertaken by armed soldiers. I'll be clear on that. It's a replacement of armed police as opposed to a complement or a supplement to armed police. It's 10:39. Io is in Romford. Io, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, mate.
I know that you can't talk about the case directly.
Don't say but. If you say but now, I'm cutting you straight off. All right?
No.
All right.
So I won't say anything about the case. I'll talk in very generic terms, okay?
Yeah.
So I'll answer your question directly first, right, which is, should the police have scrutiny or more scrutiny? Or I think definitely they should have a minimum of the scrutiny that, you know, a member of the public would have. But actually, with the state of the police, with the Casey report, et cetera, I think actually they should probably have a little bit more scrutiny, okay?
Yes,
but
they've got some reputational rehabilitation to undertake, but I don't know if the law works like that. I don't know if it needs
to be done in the context of their job.
Yes.
Obviously, their job is a very difficult job. It's a high-pressure job, a high-skilled job, but they definitely need to have context of it. I am very, very disgusted, actually, by Suella Braverman.
Get careful.
And I'm not going to say anything
because
about
you can leave it there. I think we all are. Just every day, not just every day. This time last week, a month ago, a year ago, absolutely disgusted by Suella Braverman.
I'm going to say something a little bit controversial about the police officers who have quit. Okay?
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
I'm quite disgusted by them as well, to be honest. And the reason why I'm disgusted by them as well is they understand, like we all do, right? The CPS have had a look at all the evidence. They have decided independently that there should be a trial. It doesn't mean the officer's guilty. It doesn't mean that he's innocent.
No, you're veering. Go on.
Okay, so when a trial happens, we'll see all the facts. They'll put their side across. And the jury should make a decision. I think by, them all having their weapons, it's just, it's disrespectful. You know what, right, James? You close your eyes. Think about this. God forbid, but your child got shot by a police officer, right? Suella Braverman said what she says.
Yeah, careful. Equally, imagine you're the officer. Close your eyes. And what the objection is, officers are telling me, some of whom are not comfortable ringing in, but who are sending me quite detailed texts, including this one. This is absolutely not about police officers not being investigated when they charge firearms or other circumstances. We all want accountability because we want the people we serve to trust us. It is about how those investigations take place, the threshold that police officers exercising their duty with all that training your previous caller referred to are held up against compared to that of an ordinary person. The CPS, when charging an ordinary person, has an 80% conviction rate. When they charge a police officer, that rate drops to 30%. I haven't checked these figures, which suggests that the threshold for charges is lower for a police officer than it is for other people. This is what is causing concern, and also the speed with which the investigation takes place. The Commissioner's letter in full actually outlines all of the concerns that firearms officers have. So it's not just throwing toys out of the pram. The speed at which police are investigated needs to be faster, and the threshold at which the IOPC become involved needs to be higher. So it's a little bit more nuanced than perhaps you allow, IO.
No, James, you know why I disagree with that text here? The main reason why I disagree with that text is if the police officers quit after the trial was done, whatever the result was, right? They quit after.
So when all the facts are known and when a verdict has been handed down.
I would have a lot more respect for them. Yeah, I would understand. Okay, but But
they would say we know more than you do already. We know a lot more than you do already.
Yeah, but there's no way they can know every single thing. I'm sure they haven't seen the footage. It's just rumours and speculation.
Well, okay. Well, again, I'm just going to be overcautious rather than undercautious for the purposes of this conversation, because you're going inevitably in into the specifics, which we are not looking at, and it's my fault that, because you can't really have a broader conversation about the levels of scrutiny and the thresholds of investigation, and then me shoot you down. Sorry, that's a terrible choice of phrase. Me close you down when you start inevitably examining what the parameters or the limits of that conversation might be. So just to acknowledge that we're all on thin ice here, and I'm not certainly adopting the role of the schoolmaster. 10:43 is the time. Ian is in Crawley. Ian, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James.
Hello.
It was nice to talk to you.
Oh, well, we'll see.
It's a subject, really, that's got me very vexed, which is not unusual listening to your programme.
Go on.
I am a retired inspector from the Metropolitan Police, retired 5 years ago, thankfully. I'm ashamed of what's going on at the present time. Sure. During my career, I was in professional standards and a firearms commander. And I wanted to highlight some issues around a perception that there seems to be a lack of justification and that police officers aren't open to any scrutiny.
Yeah, go on.
And that starts with the use of force. I mean, let's face it, London's a dangerous place, regrettably. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of firearms incidents in London every year. Ask yourself how many times police discharge firearms. But they are subject to scrutiny in as much as every time a weapon is drawn, technically that's a use of force, and the officer drawing that weapon will write reams and reams and reams justifying why they've done so.
Yes.
And that escalates in proportion to the level of force used. So if a shot is fired, the officers required to justify that level of force even more. So there is already an inbuilt level of justification and scrutiny. But what I really wanted to mention was when I was, and I won't go anywhere near the current case. I want to refer to a case that was well over 20 years old. I can provide dates and names if that's appropriate, but at the moment I will anonymise it.
Okay.
In my role as professional standards inspector, I was dealing with a case which was supervised by the Police Complaints Authority, which was loosely connected to a public order incident in Brixton, which followed a police shooting. And before I went in to see my supervising member, the DCI I was with met a chap he knew who was the deputy chair of the Police Complaints Authority.
Right.
Now, these are very influential people. They arc straight into the Home Office, the Home Secretary, the DPP, and we were asking each other how our respective investigations were going. Yeah. He was supervising the shooting. And he said he was incredibly frustrated. Now, 3 officers had each taken the view that a particular individual presented a danger and shot him dead.
Right.
The deputy chair of the Police Complaints Authority at the time was expressing his frustration in as much as the officers wrote reams and reams and reams justifying what they'd done, but they had refused to answer any more of his questions. Now, that questioning would have taken place under criminal caution.
Right.
And the first thing you tell anybody, whether they be a police officer
you have the right to remain
or
silent.
not, you have the right to remain silent.
Yeah.
So they were exercising their lawful right.
God.
And that frustrated that. He was incredibly angry about that. And he said he would do his utmost to ensure that those officers grip the rail in a criminal trial for murder.
Right.
Now, I found that quite alarming.
Oh, I do as well. Why did you? What is it? Because you think that police are being denied rights that are afforded to every other member of society, or potentially being denied rights, or someone was expressing a desire to deny them those rights? Yes.
It was quite clear from that remark that the seekers' rights. It was quite clear that he wasn't necessarily being altogether that objective.
No.
By expressing a desire for them to face a murder trial.
And yet some people listening will be very much of the view that police officer, is it quis custodes or Latin to that effect, in that the standards possibly should be higher for people who are allowed to carry guns on the street than they are for people who are not? Well,
the standards are already incredibly high in terms of training, in terms of justification. That former female officer expressed herself fantastically well,
did, yes.
I thought, and kind of touched on all those points. There's already a huge amount of scrutiny.
So what's the key? What do you think? And I don't want to run out of time. So what is the key for you? What is the key grievance? Generally speaking, because what we can say is this case has brought into relief a much bigger grievance that goes far beyond any individual case, and that is what has prompted people to hand in their cards. What would that grievance be?
I think there is a sense that there are hidden agendas, and people are more than happy to make their already very difficult professional lives intolerable, and that they have no faith that they are being treated fairly.
Okay. And that is
principally because of that remark that I drew your attention to.
Going
earlier.
right back for you 20 years to evidence of perhaps a hidden agenda, or not even hidden in the way that you told the story in. And I'm very grateful to you for doing so carefully and so responsibly. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The number you need to contribute to this conversation is 0345 6060 973. It's 10:49.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:53 is the time. Thank you for helping me conduct this conversation in informative, illuminating, but also a responsible fashion. Time for at least a couple more calls. Let's go to Plymouth. Mike is there. Mike, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James. So I'm a former police firearms commander myself. Never carried a firearm.
Okay.
But was a commander. And just to build on some of the points that your previous callers made, really. So first thing to say is absolutely police should be scrutinised in the event of an incident like this. And all the firearms officers that I worked with in the 5 years that I performed the role absolutely understood that and didn't have an issue with it. But I think it's important to say that the landscape is possibly changing a little bit. So there was a ruling recently, and it was another firearms case, whereby Court of Appeal ruled that honestly held belief has always been something that officers, when they use force, can rely upon because of the nature of hindsight and split-second decisions and making the best decisions in the heat of the moment. That if they act with an honestly held belief and the circumstances can justify that, then it may well be deemed appropriate. And the proof of that was beyond reasonable doubt. A recent Court of Appeal ruling pushed that down to balance of probabilities. So it may well be that depending on where this case goes, I'm not going to obviously discuss that, but where that goes, there may be a slightly shifting of the goalposts. And what I would anticipate, I know it's been framed as a sort of rebellion protest potentially by the Met officers, but I would suspect they know the broad context of what took place that day, and it's a set of circumstances very broadly.
That may be pertinent to the point you've just raised. I mean, reading the letter that Mark Rowley sent to the Home Secretary, it goes down a slightly different path, but I guess the difference between the broader picture and the specifics is what we all have to be careful of this morning. I want to run something by you that, and it's going to be quite a sensitive point that I make, and I think there's a chance you won't like it. But when I hear the phrase split-second decisions under high pressure, which I think you said, or certainly words to that effect, and a lot of people contributing to this discourse have pointed this out quite rightly, that what you're nudging towards or nodding at there is almost a presumption of virtue, which I touched on in my introduction, because these people have chosen this course, because they run towards danger when the rest of us run away from it. We as a society, we impute virtue. We allow a presumption of virtue, which is challenged by what Baroness Casey had to say, specifically about MO19, but it's also challenged for a lot of people in 2023 by the fact that Wayne Couzens and David Carrick were armed police officers. So the presumption of virtue for me is probably weaker than it's ever been in my lifetime.
Yeah, no, I absolutely take the point. I wouldn't say presumption of virtue. What I would say is the specific circumstances of, because as your callers have already amply because making a split-second decision under high pressure is not about specific circumstances. That's a broad brushstroke generalisation that, whether intentionally or not, opens the door to the possibility of, because it is so high pressure and because it is so split second, you should give these guys a break. No.
Yes.
So if they if what they see unfolding in front of them, so for instance, you referenced a case right back at the start, a long time ago now, where someone with a table, what police officers believed at the time was a firearm, but it turned out to be a table leg. That's the sort of thing I'm thinking about, is where they react to circumstances where they believe that person has a weapon or has undertaken a course of action which forces them into a situation where they have to make that decision. So I'm really talking about those, and if it can't be justified...
Although that case was found to be, that killing was found to be unlawful. It was, crikey. Harry Stanley was his name.
Stanley, yes. Yeah.
That was unlawful.
So it's
even under the old system of, under the old system of beyond reasonable doubt, that was found to be unlawful.
So it's just difficult because it's not dealing with people. It's not an exact science, and I absolutely take your point, because firearms is absolutely the sharpest end, because it's the old, potentially you pull that trigger, you take someone's life, and that is the ultimate scenario with it. But it's just when you're there, all firearms operations are designed to prevent escalation to that point. It's so well controlled. It's all about.
It's almost as if some officers feel, and I think you've all nodded towards this. It's almost as if it feels that there's a presumption of guilt until you can prove yourselves innocent in these sort of situations, and that does feel unfair, and that would be, I think, pretty close to the central grievance, the threshold for investigation, the likelihood of conviction post-prosecution, the time that it takes for these decisions to be reached. It feels as if the cards are stacked against the officers, and that grievance is magnified by the danger that they face daily. And I completely understand that. And I think we've managed to reflect most angles on this issue without, of course, exploring the specifics of the case that has prompted the surrendering of the blue card firearms status. So thank you to everybody, Mike and everybody else this hour. In the next hour, if I say HS2, what do you say?
James O'Brien on LBC.
Oh, you can say what you want this hour. Anything you want, seriously. I mean, ideally about HS2, but if you want to ring in and tell me what you had for tea last night or your favourite biscuit, that would be acceptable too. Oh, it's not good for my blood pressure, walking that tightrope of contempt of court. But I felt it was an important conversation to have, not least because the withdrawal of labour, if you like, by armed police officers. They're not, of course, allowed to go on strike, but they are legally permitted to hand in their guns, metaphorically speaking. It takes its toll. So I don't know that we've done it. When's the last time we had a conversation about HS2? Is it one of those topics about which you either know nothing or everything? And a lot of the people who think they know everything actually turn out to know nothing. Who knows everything? Who really is qualified to talk about HS2? Listen, here's what I know. It's very, very, very expensive. It's gone way over budget, and it's about to go even more over budget because of inflation. So, weirdly, the cost... So, something quite funny, or funny, not quite the right word, but if you ever come across a Brexiter pointing at export figures and saying, look, services have gone up, they're missing the difference between volume and value. It's a great piece in the Grocer magazine today. I've told you before, the trade mags are the best place to go for proper news at the moment because they don't have any axis to grind, but value change versus volume change. So imagine I'm exporting one apple, right, to France. I'm sending an apple to France, and that apple is worth £1. So Apple exports to France by JOB Inc. this week amounted to £1. Right? Apple exports to France amounted to £1. Now imagine that because of the cost of living and inflation and red tape and labour costs and the rest of it, it now costs £2. So the French are going to have to pay me £2 for my apple. Apple exports to France by JOB Inc. this week amounted to £2. But there's still only one apple. That's why it's very important to look at value change versus volume change when you want to understand what's actually happening to our trade and our export. And the Grocer today paints a very bleak picture of what is actually happening across almost all sectors. Volume change, whiskey's down 20%. Do you know who predicted that Brexit would be terrible for the whisky exports of these islands? Do you know who predicted that when he was Chief Executive of the Scotch Whisky Association? I may have got his job title wrong. Do you not know? It's going to knock your socks off this. Guess who predicted that correctly that Brexit would be catastrophic for the Scotch whisky exports, or whisky exports in general, when he was Chief Executive of the Scotch Whisky Association? Yeah, a bloke called David Frost, who is now, of course, in the House of Lords, having negotiated the Brexit so-called deal that some prunes still think was worthy of celebration. Cheese is down 3% on volume. 3%. That is a disgrace. So we're exporting less cheese than we did before, less chocolate, that's down 16.3%, less fish, salmon is down 9.6%. Breakfast cereals, big market apparently, £350 million market. That's one of the ones that's actually gone up in value. So you could argue that we're now exporting more breakfast cereal than ever before. You'd be wrong. You'd have to say we're exporting more. What's the word you want to describe it? So you're exporting in financial terms, the market has grown by about 8.4%, but we're actually exporting 11.2% less breakfast cereal. So do you see the difference between volume and value? It's really interesting, this stuff. Seriously. Soft drinks stayed about the same, would you believe? although the value, so we're exporting the same amount of soft drinks, but it's costing 10% more. So people claim exports have gone up, but we're exporting the same amount for 10%. Anyway, I mention all of that in the context of HS2 because when they review the figures, inflation will mean that what would have been 50 billion last year will be 60 billion next year, even though it's the same. You get the picture, right? George Osborne and Michael Heseltine joined forces today to call upon their Conservative successors not to pull the plug on HS2, the Manchester link, which is odd, really, given that it's all blue on blue, this fight. It would be an act of huge economic self-harm, say George Osborne and Michael Heseltine, and be a decision of such short-sightedness that we urge the Prime Minister, don't do it. How could you ever again claim to be levelling up when you cancel the biggest levelling up project? How could you claim to be taking difficult decisions for the long term when you abandon the single largest piece of infrastructure the country is building? 0345 606 0973 is the number that you need if you have a view on this. And I'm going to do something I don't do very often on the programme. I'm almost going to leave it there. Seriously. What's your view? I'll ask you. I reserve the right to ask you what it's based on. My gut reaction, I don't know enough. I know nothing really. I travel by train a lot. It's getting worse all the time. I know that HS2 is about capacity. At least as much, if not more than speed. So all the usual idiots would have been banging on about, it's going to shave 20 minutes off the journey from what's the point of that? It's not about that. It's about capacity. If we are keen to get people out of their cars and into other modes of transport, then the railway infrastructure in this country needs to be massively improved. The construction industry is queuing up to warn against the dangers of not going through with it to its fullest effect. You've got a Tory donor, I think it's the JCB bloke who used to have Boris Johnson living in his garden. Did you read about that? But lots of rich people have things like peacocks in their gardens or llamas to show how rich they are. Usually peacocks. I don't know that llamas are a particular status symbol, but you have a peacock strolling around your grounds. Anthony Bamford, the head of JCB, had a prime minister. He had a former prime minister living in a house in his garden. I mean, they don't say in his garden, do they? Rip up sort of toffs like that. They say on his estate or something like that. But I can just imagine him having breakfast with some guests. And you know, they say, look over there, there's a peacock. Oh, look, there's Boris Johnson. It's quite pathetic, really, what we've been reduced to as a nation by some of these characters. But he's very cross about the prospect of pulling the plug on HS2, presumably because there's a lot of work involved for his company. Justin Greening gave it the green light in 2012. She was a Tory, but it was under Labour in 2009 that the company was set up to develop plans for it. The budget then was £37.5 billion. The budget now, I'd have to double check, but it is considerably more than £37.5 billion. And there is logically a point at which he probably should pull the plug. It's such a weird thing, isn't it? A sunk cost fallacy. The idea that because you've already spent so much, you shouldn't stop. But there is obviously a logical argument that there has to be a point at which you've already spent so much you can't justify spending any more. But that doesn't mean it applies to HS2. Let me run through the timescale for you. There were judicial reviews and attempts to stop it. I mean, are people... forgive me for not knowing this stuff, but nobody's perfect. Are there people who have had their house compulsorily purchased who are now facing the possibility that the bit of the line that was going to go where their house used to be is now not going to be built? Because that would hurt, wouldn't it? How much? I mean, do we know the answer to that question? I'd be pretty cross if I'd had to sell my house against my will. I hadn't wanted to move, even if I got a good price for it. And then a few years down the line, the government turned around and said, we're not building it anyway. You said, can I have my house back? Sorry, mate, knocked it down. But you're not built. So I don't know. What I'm doing now is attempting to be mildly amusing while illustrating to you the fact that I'm not exaggerating my ignorance of this issue in any way, shape or form. As someone who is I'll tell you one thing I am quite well qualified on, and that is the size of the country, the difference between the North and the Midlands and London, all of which I travel routinely by rail. And there are parts of the North and the links from east to west, from York to Manchester, across the Pennines. It is a completely different universe in terms of public transport provision once you get outside London. It's a bit better in the big cities than it is elsewhere. But the idea of linking up the engine of London to other parts of the country and devolving, of course, some of the commerce as well is I would have thought really, really attractive. But what do I know? Where are we now? So June 2022, they scrapped the West Coast, the Goulburn link to the West Coast main line. March 2023, parts of the project were put on hold for 2 years because of inflation. They pushed back work on the Euston terminal, which means trains will leave and arrive from Old Oak Common in northwest London. That's a little bit insane to me. Again, I know nothing, and I'm about to open the phone lines for people who know more. But having it stop in the middle of nowhere, and it's about 500 metres north of Willesden Junction. It's not nowhere, right? But it's a bit weird to stop it there rather than bringing it into a major transport hub with links, in the case of Euston, directly to the Midlands, directly to Birmingham. And then you've got this weird flip-flopping by the government, which the weekend's noise, the mood music this weekend was that they're going to pull the plug. And then the minister that was put up this morning, I don't know what they're going to do, save it for the budget? I mean, we don't even know. Uncertainty is supposed to be the enemy of stability, isn't it? No one's got a flipping clue what's going on. Are they going to pull the plug on it? I honestly don't know. But I'm not mad about trusting people like this with the key questions or the decisions. Is it Rachel McLean? Is that her name? The minister who was doing the rounds this morning. Have a little listen to this clip of her talking on The Breakfast Show and see if you can spot what's wrong with it. Go on.
I would make the point that we have got 100,000 houses that we could be building if it wasn't for the unelected Labour Party, actually encouraged by Keir Starmer, who whipped his colleagues to vote against our very sensible plans to deviate from the defective EU laws.
Just once again, we'll have another listen to that. See if you can spot why it gave me chills to think that this person is now a senior minister in a government. Just see if you can, a single word, text me if you spot it. There's one word in this little exchange that if she was a football manager, she'd be fired by lunchtime. Have a listen to this.
I would make the point that we have got 100,000 houses that we could be building if it wasn't for the unelected Labour Party, actually encouraged by Keir Starmer, who whipped his colleagues to vote against our very sensible plans to deviate from the defective EU laws.
The unelected Labour Party. Sorry, I spoiled the competition there. The unelected... How does she think Labour MPs got into the House of Commons? Like a tombola? That's quite remarkable. I don't know, if you want to talk about unelected, when did Rishi Sunak get a mandate from the British people to be Prime Minister? He's the one who put her in the cabinet. Is she in the cabinet? Well, she's a minister anyway. Anyway, look, well done. Everyone spotted unelected. I shouldn't have given it away. It would have been quite fun to play that game for a bit longer. But it's 11:15 and we can't. So I'm going to open up the phone lines. I find this really interesting, but I don't know much about it. Now, not many subjects are like that. Often the more I learn about something, the more or the less interesting it becomes. HS2 by 12 o'clock today might be the most boring phone-in we've done in weeks. Or it might be a really interesting one. I can't make any predictions because I don't know enough about it. What I do know is this. It's not finished. It's cost a ton of money and the government are toying with the idea of cutting their losses, as they would describe it, and not going ahead with it. Cautiously, that seems to me to be the worst of all possible worlds. Because if you objected to it on environmental grounds, you've already lost, and then you're not going to get the payoff, which would have been the rail link. If you objected to it on other grounds, you perhaps will celebrate, but most of it is still going to be there. So the idea of not seeing it through to fruition seems to me to be silly. But what do I know? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. If you hit those numbers now, you will get through. It's 11:16.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:19. So, again, it probably illustrating my ignorance more than anything else. If they don't build the Manchester to Birmingham bit of HS2, does that mean we've got a link essentially from Willesden to Birmingham? It seems a bit. There's got to be more to it than that. But I think the figure is £71 billion. £71 billion it's cost so far, with an original estimate of 35 billion. And for that 71 billion, you're going to get less than was originally mooted when it was launched, because they've already abandoned some bits of it. What's going on? is the short question. This is how the Evening Standard reports the morning's events. A minister sparked fresh confusion on Monday over the future of HS2 as a backlash grew over shelving the Birmingham to Manchester link of the high-speed railway. Housing Minister Rachel Maclean initially said the decision had been put back until the Chancellor's autumn statement on November the 22nd, despite weekend reports that an announcement could be made as soon as this week, ahead of the Conservatives' annual conference in Manchester next week. There's a rail strike as well at the weekend, timed, I think, to coincide with the Conservative conference in Manchester. So they'll get a bit of a introduction to the state of the railways, won't they? Or not. Rob's in Rotherham. Rob, what made you pick up the phone, mate?
Because I'm just bored of this whole rhetoric about HS2 ever being anything other than pushing the wealth from London. So I truly believe that HS2 was always meant to go to Birmingham and nowhere else. And if you look at the facts around it, you can see it. So, for example, I phoned in to say that in Doncaster, as soon as HS2 was mentioned, they built a state-of-the-art college. Now, it's called the National College for Advanced Transport and Infrastructure. There hasn't been a single student at that college because it's never been used. In fact, in April, it was announced before it ever actually opened that they're closing it.
Okay, this is
there.
I'm slightly wary of. I don't know why you're telling me that.
Well, it was sold as this big thing.
But it's got a campus in Birmingham as well, not just Doncaster.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's not coming to Doncaster. And like you asked earlier, you asked the question: have people's houses been compulsory purchased?
Yeah,
and the answer is yes. People up north.
No, I know, but what are you telling me, Rob, about today's developments? Is it good or bad? Well, hang on, you can't answer the question until I'm asked it. Is it good or bad that they might be calling off this bit of it? Is it good or bad?
They've already called it off.
They haven't.
They have.
They haven't.
Right, okay, so in that case, then why have they already implemented a faster rail structure over the Pennines between Sheffield and Manchester?
The Birmingham to Manchester link, as of today, I knew this was going to happen. It's not your fault, Rob. It's just one of those subjects, isn't it? So the Birmingham to Manchester link, as it stands, during this conversation between Rob in Rotherham and me, at 22 minutes after 11 on Monday, September the 25th, 2023, is going ahead.
Okay.
The suggestion this weekend is they might announce that it's not.
I think it's...
But Phase 2A and Phase 2B, Phase 2A and Phase 2B, which are the bits that you're referring to, have gone ahead and have cost millions, if not billions of pounds. So that's why I'm a little bit confused about what you think you're telling me.
Well, I just don't believe that it was ever meant to come up here.
Yeah, but that just sounds mad, mate.
Why?
Well, it's a conspiracy theory.
Right. Yeah, no, we can say, but that's the problem at the moment, especially for us that live up in the north. Everything's a conspiracy theory.
No, just the idea that they've announced it, built a lot of it, but never intended to open it. That's the only thing I'm calling a conspiracy theory about.
But up north.
Well, Birmingham's not even the north. Birmingham's the Midlands, mate.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
What?
Up north. Up north. I've always known that train is not coming up here.
Right.
We knew that it was going to stop in Birmingham because if you look at places like Milton Keynes, Milton Keynes is literally now all the poor people who can't afford to live in London, and that's been pushed further.
But everyone,
out.
So why did they tell the fib then? Because all it's going to do is cause enormous grievance and upset. Why did they even announce it if they weren't intending to do it? I do think this is bonkers, but I'm going to humour you. All right.
Well, I'll give you a humorous thing then.
Is it from up north?
No, because I can clearly tell you don't think there's a north-south divide. Blah blah blah.
I certainly do think there's a north-south divide. Blah blah blah. There's a clear north-south. There's a huge north-south divide. I'm just wondering why, given that not doing it would cause such upset, why they announced that they were going to do it while always intending not to, Rob?
Because it makes them sound like they actually care about the north and not just London.
No, it doesn't, though. It does the opposite of that. If they announce it and then don't deliver it, it does the opposite of...
Because then, like Rishi Sunak did the other day, then they just come out and blame the working class people for it.
They're going to blame the working class people for not building HS2.
Yeah, because
how's that going to work? How are they going to do it? Rob, mate, you need to give your head a wobble, mate.
Okay, well, I'll give you an example.
Well, go on then.
The other day,
Mr.
Sunak went on national television.
Yes.
And he said, right, unfortunately, because we're poor, we can no longer look after the climate. It's not going to be a thing anymore, unfortunately. We're pushing all our targets back.
All right.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, I would argue...
Would you?
That should have been done in the Houses of Parliament.
Well, I would as well, but I don't know what I would as well, but that doesn't prove a north-south divide or blaming the working class for anything. I mean, you're just saying things now, all the right things, but not necessarily in the right order, Rob.
Right, so... What about all the money that is wasted?
Why do you keep moving around? The question's really simple. If the plan all along was not to open the Birmingham to Manchester link, why have they spent millions of pounds on it already? And why did they announce it at all, given that all it's going to do is give people up north the hump?
Well, because we're used to it.
That's not an answer to my question. The words "because we're used to it" bear no relation to the words "why did he do it?"
Understand.
All right. Well, listen, I'm happy to stand corrected on this, but in order to do so, I would have to understand at least a part of what you were saying. And at the moment, I don't. Pressure's on David in Washington now to rescue the HS2 phone-in. David, what would you like to say?
Well, first off, James, good morning. We've spoken about sunk cost fallacy before, you and I, and this is not one of those situations. Sunk cost fallacy applies to cons, Ponzi schemes, Brexit.
You're quite right. No, I stand corrected.
It's not
because it's the word fallacy, isn't it? That's the point. This is not a fallacy. This is real. It exists, and it's an exchange of goods and services for cash.
Yes. So this is real.
Sorry, you're right.
My main point is, living in the northeast, I just don't understand why this project started in the south first. If they were going to level up and prove this was a levelling up project, right? Why was the concentration on the Midlands to London link first? Why didn't it start in Leeds, Newcastle, Manchester?
Because you'd need the bit from Midlands to London in order to get from the north to London. So I
don't want to get to London, James. This is the issue. Why we're trying to race to London? If we're levelling up, we're wanting to make transport in the north easier across the north, around the north.
This is not necessarily the topic that I thought we were going to be discussing today.
Okay. Right,
because that was about the wisdom or otherwise of calling off the Birmingham to Manchester bit.
Okay.
But the question of what they should have done instead. So you'd have gone in hard on Leeds and Edinburgh, would you?
Yeah, whatever. I mean, we're still waiting for the A1 levelling up. We're still waiting for the A1 to be duelled north of Newcastle.
Yeah, I know. But again,
there's a list of things that should have been done.
There's a list of topics I'm never going to go near again, and you're very close to putting HS2 on it.
Right. Okay.
I don't want to. Listen, you're pushing me into a position now where I very nearly said I don't care about the A1 outside Newcastle, but that's how Alan Partridge got cancelled by farmers, and I'm not going to fall into that trap.
I drove yesterday from Manchester to the northeast on the M62 on a Sunday.
Yes.
Absolutely heaving.
That's immigration. That's immigration. Nigel Farage told me a few years ago. It's all about immigration. All right, so we need a train, but we disagree about where it should be.
Yeah, everywhere.
And how would you personally greet the announcement in the budget, if it does come to pass, that they are scrapping the Manchester bit?
Absolutely appalling.
Right.
Okay. I believe, I agree with Michael Heseltine. That's something I thought I would never hear myself.
I usually agree with Michael Heseltine. Post Thatcher.
I suppose once he's resigned and once he's got more, once he's sort of living in the real world.
So where would a cancelled HS2, he asks in the Times today, leave the North and the Midlands? Abandoned is the answer. They have been encouraged, and in turn they encourage the private sector to spend large sums preparing for it. This is an insult to the many years they have put into preparing for the HS2 line that central governments have repeatedly promised them. So it's a kick in the ghoulies to the North and the Midlands.
a slap in the face. And I mean, Manchester.
It's a kick in the ghoulies, mate. It's not a slap in the face. Worse than that.
Okay, yeah, it makes your eyes water. Manchester for us from up here in the northeast is still pretty far south.
Yes.
I mean, it's 100. I mean, it took me an hour. It takes 2 hours to drive.
Yes.
Okay.
Especially when it's busy.
It's 140 miles. You've got to go over the Pennines. The East Coast Main Line is fantastic. Like when I was.
It's not even halfway up the country, is it, Manchester? If you include Scotland, it's not even halfway up there.
When I was working on government projects in education, I used to travel to London regularly. 2 hours and 50 minutes down to King's Cross. Terrific. Really good. They did start holding meetings in York for a short while, but which is even better. Yeah, but that didn't last long when they closed the offices down. But we're okay. That East Coast Main Line is all right. Okay, but you can't go anywhere else. It takes me longer to get to Birmingham on the train and twice the price than it does to get to London.
Yeah.
Okay, and the tracks are shut. Try and work on that train. Your laptop doesn't stay still for a second. You get travel sick. The tracks are so bad. The trains are so bad. It's appalling.
Well, it should just be, in many ways, a no-brainer to have a really good or much superior railway infrastructure for all of the reasons that you've alluded to. But the government is flirting with the idea of nixing it. And I don't fully understand why, except, and this perhaps is where Robin Rotherham had the beginnings of a point, except in the context of saying we can't afford it. And then you sort of find yourself asking, well, what can you afford? It's a bit like inheritance tax, which someone's calculated how much Rishi Sunak will save. Personally, I'm not suggesting that's the main reason why he's in favour of abolishing it, but goodness me, it must have turned his head a little bit. Thank you, David. I'm late for this. Lottie Morley has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:35 is the time. Quite a few people asking me why the BBC and others have not reported or did not report on the Rejoin March that unfolded in London on Saturday. And I don't know, to be honest with you. I mean, if it had kicked off, they would have done. But I know that France 24's UK correspondent was there, Benedict Pavio, who we've spoken to a few times. She reported from the scene, and I quote, tens of thousands of people who've come from all over the United Kingdom converged here in London in the heart of Westminster. The German MEP, Terry Renke, was there. She told PA that the march showed the UK had managed to build one of the biggest pro-European movements all across Europe. And it's always hard to get exact numbers on this kind of thing, but the Spanish media reported, El Mundo put the number of attendees in the thousands, saying that it received more coverage in the international media than in the local. So that's, it is scandalous and bizarre that the BBC are refusing to cover it, said Peter Benson, one of the spokespeople for the NRM, the National Rejoin March. And I don't know. I can only speculate, as you do as well. I know there was is Robbie Gibbs still on the board at the BBC, the fellow that used to work for Theresa May? I know that an instruction went out not long after the referendum that the BBC was going to sort of pretend that it wasn't still an issue, and that all of the questions had been answered. I think Robbie Gibb was the bloke that told people not to interrogate the £350 million for the NHS claim on the side of the bus. If you've scored a glorious victory, I would have thought you'd want your critics to carry on talking about it forever, because the more they talk about it, the stupider they look. The better everything goes, then the sillier Project Fear becomes. But actually not wanting it covered, not wanting it to be talked about, just looks weird. I don't know why the BBC made that decision, is the short answer, but well done everybody who did turn up. And well done the international media for doing a better job than the British media on reporting on something happening in Britain. 11:37 is the time. I wonder if they're better on HS2 than I am so far. But I never give up. I take it as a challenge. Peter is in Barnet. Peter, what made you pick up the phone?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Peter.
I was involved in the Eurostar project, the high-speed train that runs between London, Paris and Brussels and Amsterdam from the very beginning. I joined Eurostar in 1992.
Okay.
We opened the service in 1994. But at the beginning of the service, we were running out of Waterloo Station on the slow lines all the way through Kent down to the Channel Tunnel. And it took us in the region of about an hour and 40 minutes to get from London to the tunnel. In 2006 and 2007, the HS1, High Speed Line 1, was opened between London and the Channel Tunnel. Yeah. And that more than halved the time it took us to get from London down to the Channel Tunnel. But it also increased the numbers of passengers because it was so much quicker once that opened to get from London to Paris and Brussels and then on to Amsterdam. The same thing's going to happen with HS2. HS2 is very much needed because we've got a divided country. The Manchester, Leeds area, the middle of the country up there is so much worse off than the wealthy southeast.
How does it help? How does HS2 change that, just in your view? Because some people are unclear.
Because at the moment it takes roughly 2 hours, 20 minutes on a fast train from Manchester to London.
Yeah.
With HS2, it's 1 hour 11, so it's virtually half the time. It brings Manchester, time-wise, so much closer to London. And why is that important? I'll give you a good example. In France, there's a city in northern France called Lille. Now, Lille was becoming quite a depressed city because it's in the middle of the coal mining area in northern France. The French railways built the high-speed line from Paris out to Lille and then on to Calais. But as soon as that line was opened in France, Lille became a thriving city. Today, it's got so much more investment. There's new industries built up around it because it's now 1 hour away from Paris.
Why? I'm not being thick, but why is that? Because I can see that the speed of the link would increase the catchment area for people who would work in London but live elsewhere. But why does it bring business to areas that are currently 2 hours from London by making them 1 hour from London? I'm not doubting what you're telling me. I just want you to explain it.
Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't know exactly why, because I'm not a businessman.
Fair enough, but it does, and it worked in Lille, and you can point at the examples where it does have that impact.
It does have that impact very much, and it did have that impact as well at Ashford in Kent until, unfortunately, the pandemic came along and we had to shut the station at Ashford. But that did attract a lot of investment at Ashford because it became much closer to the continent.
Yes, okay, I get it.
But there's another thing that a lot of people are missing.
Go on.
When France was the first country in Europe to build a high-speed train network. Now virtually every country in Europe has got one. Spain's got the largest high-speed network. But France, they didn't do it all at once. It wasn't done overnight. In fact, they opened their first high-speed line in 1981. But it started roughly 25 to 30 kilometres south of Paris, and it went to Lyon, which is about 3/4 of the way down the country. That was the first bit they opened. It took them another 20 years before they finished that line from Paris all the way down to Marseille. But what that first section showed the passengers and the French public was that travelling so much faster and reducing the journey times makes travelling throughout their country so much quicker and
more efficient and more pleasurable. So what do you then, the idea of calling time on the link from Birmingham to Manchester, what do you make of that?
Well, personally, it would be cheaper. I think it will inevitably be built. It's going to be built because once passengers start using the high-speed bit from Birmingham down to London, they'll suddenly realise, because most people have never been on high-speed trains, let's be honest.
That's true, yeah.
Most people go on holiday by plane. But those of us who've worked with high-speed trains, I spent 20 years at Eurostar seeing the passenger numbers grow considerably. And people used to say the Channel Tunnel will be a white elephant, people won't use it. But now, before the pandemic hit, virtually every train was filled.
Yeah.
What's going to happen once people start using the British high-speed train from Birmingham down to London? They'll see the advantages of it.
And then it becomes even more of a betrayal of the North when they say,
exactly,
because you see what you haven't got.
Exactly, very much. But don't forget, although the high-speed line, the actual infrastructure will, if this Manchester bit gets cancelled by the Tory government, it doesn't mean to say that the North won't get high-speed trains. They will, because although the infrastructure will finish just north of Birmingham, the high-speed trains will then, they'll go fast from London just north of Birmingham, then they'll be joining the classic lines and running at about half the speed. So they will carry on to Manchester, and they will carry on to, they'll even going up to Glasgow and Edinburgh and Liverpool. It's just that without building the high-speed line all the way through to Manchester, it's going to lengthen the journey time. So high-speed trains will reach the parts of the country that they were always envisaged to reach. It's just that without building that Manchester bit, you only get the advantages of high speed.
And that's, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you get this, I don't know whether it's a disconnect, Peter, or you don't know what something does until it's there. And the more we talk about it, the more the calculation to call time on it, regardless of how over budget it may have become, is kind of harder to grasp. And especially, so I saw some talk this morning of a possible snap election, because these are all quite easily packaged policies, aren't they? We're going to abolish inheritance tax. Just don't mention that only 4% of estates generally are eligible for it. Although, actually, interesting psychology, even when people find out they're not going to have to pay it, or 96% of the population finds out that whatever they inherit, if they inherit anything, it won't be eligible for inheritance tax. There's something about an inheritance tax that people do seem to find inappropriate or unjust. But that looks like an election thing. It doesn't affect much money in terms of bottom lines, but it's a kind of an election-y thing. We're going to cancel HS2. That looks like the opposite. So where are all the people who would welcome the cancelling of HS2? Because Rishi Sunak's calculation is twofold. A, you exist, and B, you're more likely to be in the north and the Midlands than you are to be in the southeast, because you're the ones that are going to be denied it, and that's something you're going to welcome. That's the bit I don't get, the politics of it, never mind the logistics. But we've got another 15 minutes, so there's plenty of time for you to fill that space. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:49 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm learning a lot today, which is always nice. Reims, which is in the Champagne region of France, has a high-speed station, TGV or TGV. I don't know, in 45 minutes now to central Paris, Miranda tells me, which means it's 140 kilometres. And since they've opened that station, lots of Parisians have moved there, making the commute cheaper. The quality of life has improved and it's become a bit of a tech hub. So, the more we learn about this, the more it would seem to be, if they do pull the plug, correct to describe it as a betrayal of the North, which is a very odd thing to do given the logistics of the 2019 election and the discovery or the emergence of the so-called Red Wall. It's 10 to 12. I'm taking it off the list of things we'll never talk about again. I'm quite enjoying this. After a rocky start, things have improved. Raymond is in Uxbridge. Raymond, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that Labour are to blame for all the troubles of HS2.
Oh.
It was baked in the planning from the beginning.
Yes.
In 2009, they decided that the best way to get to Birmingham would be to tunnel under West London, build the biggest viaduct in Western Europe across the lakes at Harefield and Denham, and then tunnel under the Chilterns. I defy you to find a more expensive route.
How would you have done it?
Done up. The Romans knew the way.
What? The Romans? The Romans didn't build railways.
Yeah. No, they didn't build, but they knew the best route. The canal builders knew the best way to Birmingham.
They couldn't tunnel, could they? I mean, we've got... You're familiar with the London Underground. I know it's overground at Uxbridge, but the technology improved immeasurably with the Victorians, and tunnelling was much more efficient.
And they didn't need to tunnel.
Right.
They went up past Mill Hill.
Who, the Romans?
Through that... in Watling Street.
Okay. I mean, this is a novel. I like it. So they should never mind tunnelling. We should forget about tunnelling. We should have done what the Romans would have done.
Yeah, well, we should have followed the route because it is the logical route.
Here's the thing.
Way that
go on.
The M1
Romans
went that way to Birmingham.
I know. What about the Egyptians? What would the Egyptians have done? What would the Egyptians have done?
Never mind about the Egyptians. Just think about what I'm
hang on
saying.
a minute. Why are you bringing the Romans into it?
To tunnel under West London.
But what about the London Underground?
Yes, but it's the cost you've got to concentrate on.
The precedent of tunnelling under West London had already been established.
On this leg,
what happened?
They could have finished the rest of it.
What happened in December 2010?
So the Tories got in, and I agree with you.
They got in May. They got in May 2010. So in January 2009, Labour set up HS2 Limited. In December 2010, it was the Tory Lib Dem coalition that announced what was going to happen. They reviewed the plans and announced the Y-shaped route to Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds would be put out for consultation. So that would be David Cameron and Nick Clegg. In January 2012, the Conservative Transport Secretary Justine Greening gave the green light. So just run us through how it was all Labour's fault again.
Well, because they planned the original unsustainable.
No, they didn't even put a single shovel in the ground. The plans were reviewed in December 2010 by the coalition, and the green light was issued by the Tory Transport Secretary Justine Greening in January 2012. So just explain how that was Labour's fault.
So Labour and Conservatives...
No, you said it was all Labour's fault. And then you talked about the Romans, and now I'm steering you back to the people who actually made the decisions and issued the green lights.
The natural route from London to Birmingham.
Yes, which they should have done it like Watling Street.
West London and building the most...
But why are you blaming Labour for that, though? Why are you blaming Labour for that when they were...
That was in their original plans.
Well, there was nothing to stop them changing the plans in December 2010 and then issuing the green light in January 2012.
Quite true.
Well, there we go. We got there in the end, Raymond. But up the Romans.
Well, I did have a word with Boris. I don't know if you know, I live in Uxbridge.
I did mention that.
About 3 years ago.
Oh, yes.
And I said to him, why don't you use the old Central Railway route? Loads of the infrastructure still there. You'll save 60% of your costs. Yeah. And he said, the technicians tell me that's too difficult. Because I said to him, you could take that money you save and build a route from Liverpool to Leeds and cement us in the north. But they didn't listen to me, so...
Well, more fool him. And I'll tell you what, and look what happened to him, Raymond. There's a lesson there for all of us.
There is indeed.
Mind how you go. We're staying in Uxbridge. Sarah's there. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Thanks
Sarah.
for taking my call.
You're very welcome. What have the Romans ever done for you?
Well, the only thing that Raymond was right about there was that it is in the wrong place, the route.
Right.
It is curving up the Colne Valley, which is a really important water production area with...
but that's all. That's over and done with now. It
isn't. If you go and look at it today,
yes,
you'll see.
No, but
that
no one's suggesting that they don't do that.
Been built.
Yes.
There's nowhere where it's ready for the track at all. You know
no one is suggesting that we don't pull the. No one's suggesting that we pull the plug on that bit.
I'm suggesting that. I think that's the only sensible thing to do.
Right.
Scrap the whole thing because the moment they're spending
£71 billion.
£136 million every week.
Yes.
They're spending today £136 million every week. It is a rip-off.
Okay.
It is a con.
What?
It's almost like a shell company, HS2. They've got these main contractors that are...
it's not. No, careful. Don't do any libels. Don't do any libels. I thought we were going to be safe this hour. All right, okay. But so that's two people in Uxbridge who don't like it. Everyone in the north is quite keen. That's a balance. Thank you, Sarah. Shane's in Leeds. I bet you like it.
Like HS2. Yes, I do.
Oh,
but I think the last two...
Do you know why that is?
Go on.
Because you're not in Uxbridge.
Well, I think those last two callers just answered your question about who's going to like it.
Yes.
But what I wanted to say was, as somebody who's familiar with the public transport infrastructure in Japan, I just want to ask, why are we so bad at delivering infrastructure projects?
That's a very good question.
Since the year 2000, Japan has managed to open 3 Shinkansen lines and 2 extensions. 3 complete new lines, 2 extensions.
Yes.
Bangkok has managed to build 6 light railway, mass transport.
I just need to correct something. The Colne Valley has actually just had a huge viaduct built to stop the valley being ripped up, Lawrence tells me. So I don't even know whether that's true or not, but I'm reading it out live on the program. Professional.
But I mean,
well, you tell me you can't ring in with these riddles. Why do you think, as someone who knows a lot about Japanese railway infrastructure, why do you think we're so bad at it?
Partly because of local objections, I think.
Yes, people like Sarah.
And partly because the planning is so bad here. Costs seem to rise exponentially. But anybody who's used a high-speed rail will tell you that it is really important. It increases the catchment area of businesses, which is why...
So what are they playing at then? Why are the Tories talking about nixing the Birmingham to Manchester bit?
Possibly because of your people in Uxbridge, I reckon.
Oh.
It's an election plot because there were so many people against it to start with.
They were.
That he's trying to get their votes onto his side. That he may have lost.
It's hard to see who that. I mean, with respect to Raymond and Sarah, the objections they raised are unlikely to be addressed much by calling off the Birmingham to Manchester link. That's not the problematic bit for either of them.
The other group will be the people who thought that it was far too expensive and the money should have been spent on local infrastructure.
But they've already spent it now.
Well, yes, but sound bites and whatnot.
Sound bites and whatnot.
Who's going to look too closely at the figures? I mean, that would be insane to look at the figures and make a decision based on that.
Well, you would have thought so. It's curiouser and curiouser, isn't it? Just out of interest, how come you are au fait with the transport infrastructure of Japan? It's an odd enthusiasm.
I used to travel there quite a lot.
Did you?
Yes.
Different world.
I did.
Different world.
Yes, completely. Public transport is just unbelievable there.
What about those pictures I saw as a schoolboy of people being pushed onto trains with long sticks?
That does happen, but it's only... Yes, but it's only true on the urban lines at peak time.
Not the national, not the big transnational lines. The sort of
those ones have enough room for you to.
So it's the equivalent of the tube, really. The ones where you get pushed on board with a big stick.
Yes.
Under my glorious rule, I'm going to introduce that to the London railways, but only in Uxbridge.
Oh, that will please Sarah.
Everywhere else you'll be fine, but in Uxbridge you got what they were like big. Have you ever seen these pictures? They're amazing. It's like a pillow on a stick, and it's so crammed. I mean, good knows the rush hour's bad enough here, but they're pushing people on, cramming them in, and then the doors shut. It's an absolute nightmare. Thank you, Shane. Well, that was interesting, wasn't it? For all sorts of reasons. Some of them expected, some of them not so much. But I think we can all agree that the HS2 issue is certainly one that prompts a lot of excitement. Blimey James writes this unsigned texter, this is more fun than Mystery Hour. I'm inclined to agree. I was certainly in the same ballpark. And we will return to it, no doubt, in the future, and by which point possibly I'll know a little bit more than I do now. I've got a strange one for you next. Stick around.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 12, and we're going to have a completely unexpected conversation now, prompted by, and it's a real mark of a brilliant columnist, when just an angle on an issue that you hadn't previously noted before can prompt an entire hour of radio. It's by Nesreen Malik in The Guardian, who's one of my favourite writers already, but I hadn't thought about this before because because it's not about me. I have noted that the hard-working family, you know that the hard-working family, everything in politics is about hard-working families, which, as someone who routinely puts in a 3-hour-a-day shift, I did feel a little alienated by. I did. What about families like me? What about not hard-working, but well rewarded? What about that? I mean, who speaks for me in modern Britain? Who speaks for the 3-hour-a-day? 1%ers. That's it. I mean, who's addressing that? But that's not obviously what she's writing about today. She's writing about being single, which I'm not sure we've ever done on the programme before. We may have done it once in the context of holidays. I do remember being slightly surprised by the premiums attached to holidaying alone and the businesses that are dedicated to providing. But if you think about it, you almost always go away as a couple. Or with a mate, I suppose. And therefore, the cost is halved. Everything you get costs the same if you're on your own, but you're splitting it between two of you. And in the context of politics, it's actually really interesting. And what I like about this as well, apart from my well-established enthusiasm for things I don't know much about and stories that aren't about me, we also have the fact that it's not party political, this. It applies equally to everybody. So the Tories are always banging on about hard-working families, hard-working tax-paying families who should be rewarded. These are quotes from Rishi Sunak. They've sort of appointed the hard-working family, Nesreen writes, as a victimised group that must be protected from overzealous policies that care little for real people. While we focus on helping hard-working families, Sunak said last week, all Keir Starmer does is punish them. Keir Starmer, meanwhile, is talking about hard-working families and how Labour is working for a future where families come first in a country where, and I quote, many of Britain's hard-working families are at breaking point. So Sunak and Starmer are squabbling over the hard-working families of Britain, both claiming to represent the hard-working families of Britain. We will leave out, for the purposes of this conversation, the not hard-working families. And we'll focus on the not families instead, the single people. It's a very strange one, isn't it? That the single person is almost entirely ignored by political discourse. And until I read this article today, I hadn't even clocked it. It's never easy being single. You can't split a deposit. You can't split the rent or insurance or energy bills or more. Cheaper to do the food shop for two per person than it is for one. Cheaper to share a car and split the cost of filling the tank. Cheaper to share one internet bill and streaming account. You've got two incomes coming in and quite a lot of the time only one outgoing on stuff like this. So traditionally the estimate is that people need to spend about 10% more of their disposable income than two-person households. But what I'm interested in now is how a cost of living crisis changes that figure and why single people have become invisible to policymakers. So, what's it like being single? I know it's not easy being green because Kermit the Frog told me, but what's it like being single, particularly and especially in this cost of living crisis? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. But the politics of it, when the two main party leaders seem to be arguing about who's best placed to represent hard-working families, seems really, really weird, because about 30% of all households are people living alone. About 8.3 million people live alone, and that constitutes about 30% of all households. So have you noticed this? Have you noticed this? That you are not actually part of the conversation. You're not part of the political conversation. There's almost a sort of rhetorical disenfranchisement underway that I simply hadn't noticed. I wonder whether you had. I presume, like Nesreen, that you have done, because it's you that's being essentially ignored. So in addition to the question of what's it like being single in the cost of living crisis, what has really come home to you as a consequence of your circumstances, but also, is it fair to suggest that you are politically irrelevant? Do you feel that you are not being recognised by political discourse in this country? This is what I mean by not having clocked it myself. Yeah, I always have that slight internal giggle when I hear about hard-working families. Because I do work hard, and I work for much more than 3 hours a day. And until relatively recently, I was working every afternoon as well on my new book, How They Broke Britain, which is out on November the 2nd. You can find a link to pre-ordering it in my Twitter bio at Mr. James OB, or indeed all reputable websites. But I do work hard. I pretend that I don't work hard because I clock off at 1 o'clock, and everybody thinks I just sort of go to the pub and put my feet up. And some days I do, but I do work hard because I'm never off duty. I once said on air that I work harder than builders, and the right-wing corners of social media had a absolute field day for about 4 hours when we then released the clip of me saying, I think that lots of people are going to pretend not to understand what I just said and have a right-wing field day in some corners of Twitter. That was fun. I mean, that shows how hard I work. Even when I'm on duty, I'm off duty, and even when I'm off duty, I'm on. But I don't know of the politics. All you hear now is talk of hard-working families, and you sit there thinking, well, I work bloody hard, but I'm not I am single. 2 questions, because I don't want to exclude hard-working families from this conversation. 2 questions. What's it like? What was it like? And why are they doing this? Is it just sort of sprung up by accident? Also, what is a hard-working family? You might work hard, but I bet you've got a teenager who doesn't, or you might be working really hard, but your husband's phoning it in every day, sometimes literally. What is a hard work? Why have hard-working families become the political? What's the word I'm looking for? The focus. The focus, there it is. Yeah, the focus of political discourse in this country. 11 minutes after 12 is the time. So there's a couple of ways into this. The first way is, what is it like being single? And the second way is, why are single people being ignored politically? 0345 6060 973. And then the third way, of course, is why do you think, and this is something that we can all join in on, why do you think the hard-working family has become the focus of political discourse for both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer? And because I can answer the third question, but not the first two, I'm going to have a little think out loud. Because it conveys, as Nesri Malik in this brilliant column suggests, it conveys a form of bogus victimhood. A hell of a lot of British politics during this strangely populist period has been about bogus victimhood. Think about Farage. He's always a victim of something or other. He's always whining about being unfairly treated, whether it's by Brussels or by his bank. Or he really did claim once when he was late for an event that the traffic jams were caused by immigration. He's always bloody whining. Never stops whining. Whine. All the whining. And in order for your whining to have political traction, it has to invoke victimhood. So we are victims of the European Union. We are victims of immigration. We are victims of refugees or whatever it might be. And hard-working families are being cast as victims by both of these characters. I don't think it works, does it? I just don't get it. It's like where families come first. Well, who comes second then, Keir Starmer? If families come first, who comes second? Single people. How's that a good idea electorally? Vote for me where single people come second or third or fourth. Many of Britain's hard-working families are at breaking point. Is that what we're talking about here? As a member of a family, you're more likely to feel that you're close to breaking point than you would do if you were a single person? The data suggests otherwise to me. It seems to me that you've got further. You've got to spread less further than people who are in families. You know, even food, fresh food, going off in the fridge, being cheaper to buy more. I can't see the logic in the prioritisation, that's another good word, the prioritisation of so-called hard-working families by Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. So actually, that might be the most interesting question. Why are they doing it? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And then the question of singleness, singletude. What's the word? Singleness. Being single, solitude. It's not singularity. No, that means something quite different, Keith. Singledom, singleopitude, singlash. What does it mean politically? Do your politics change if you're single? Do you feel excluded? And what's it actually like? I like this. Speaking as a member of a hard-working family, James, I get up at 5:30 every morning to make sure my wife gets to work. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm here all week. Try the veal. It's coming out to 12:15. So there's quite a lot to get your teeth into there. But really, the prioritisation of the hard-working family and the concomitant neglect of the single voter. There it is. Your thoughts on those two things, what I just said. 0345 6060 973. I should do all introductions like that. I'll just burble on for 20 minutes, and then at the end I'll say your thoughts on those things, what I just said. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 12 is the time. It's not easy being single, but politically you don't exist anymore. Had you noticed this? And of course the costs as well. But the politics of it is the more... What's the word I'm looking for? It's not nebulous. It's nuanced. I know what it's... I can get my head around the money side of it really, really easily, right? My wife and I live in one house, so everything is split down the middle, technically. And if I lived on my own, I'd have to spend a lot more of my income on just surviving. So I get that, but I want to hear more about it. But the political which I hadn't noticed before Nesreen Malik pointed it out this morning on page 3 of the comment section of G2, the middle of The Guardian, that it's literally the conversation completely ignores you. I'm wondering, A, whether you noticed, and B, how you feel about it. Gary's in Bournemouth. Gary, what would you like to say?
James, you've absolutely hit a nerve.
Well, it's not me. It's Nesreen Malik, actually. It's a brilliant column. I can't recommend it highly enough. But go on, tell me more.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I listen to your show virtually every day. Don't ask me what I'm doing on the other days.
No,
but
what are you doing?
Pretty much every... No, I said don't ask me.
Oh, sorry.
But pretty much every topic that you cover over the weeks, months, years... As a single person, I often look at it and I think, well, this is double the problem to me. So whether it's, the price of mortgages going up, whether it's cost of living, everything, you're not sharing the cost with anyone. And it has such a massive impact on us as single people. Now, I must admit, I haven't got any children.
I was about to say, there is a balance here. A significant part of a lot of people's cash is going on the kids. But that's not the conversation we're having today.
Yeah, but I think you'll probably I'm sure you'll get a lot of calls from people who are single parents, and that's not necessarily of their own choosing either.
Very true.
And I think very much that term, hard-working families, really irritates me whenever it's used, because I think it's just a ploy to get a certain group of people to vote.
But why is it? Why say families and not just people? Why not just say hard-working people? What's it speaking to? It must be speaking to something that we can't quite pin down, because it's alienating you. It is deliberately or not. It is actively alienating you. You are not a member of a hard-working family. You are a hard-working Gary.
Well, I'm on my lunch break at the moment, but it doesn't seem like it at the moment. Maybe it's because it's aspirational. Maybe it's because people like myself don't want to be single necessarily.
Okay, fair enough.
So maybe they're appealing to the better nature of me, that I would rather be in a family unit than I would be living on my own. But the fact that we're just completely ignored, I just find it so frustrating.
Well, yeah, I do too. When do you really notice it? Just out of interest, you mentioned mortgages. Well, where else for the kind of where you think, crikey, that really is a sort of penalty?
Well, I think anything that comes out of your bank account, because there isn't anything other than stuff that you buy for yourself as an individual that you wouldn't be getting a contribution from someone else. So I mentioned to your producer earlier that council tax is a really good example of it.
Isn't there a bit of a benefit? Don't you get a single person's discount?
You do.
25, but it's only 25%. It's not 50%.
25%.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you're almost punished for being single. And actually, being single is quite expensive.
Yes.
Because you really want to go out and meet people and do as many things as possible. But actually, with the current cost of living, I think that it really does actually impact the opportunity to even meet people.
Yeah, of course it does. And a night in is a very different proposition if you're on your Todd compared to what it is if you're living with someone that you love or, are still sort of quite fond of, if you're lucky. Thank you, Gary. You're not alone for what it's worth. I bet you knew that already. Richard in Great Yarmouth says, this is why I love your show, James. It always seems to talk to me. I've sadly just become single over the last few months after my 15-year marriage ended, and I've been left with having to find an extra £1,500 a month on top of the ever-increasing prices that have happened over the last few years. It's entirely new for me. I'm only 33. I married my high school love. I'm extremely hardworking, self-employed, and an overall good egg. I've gone from eating out regularly, planning holidays and sharing my life with someone, to lonely evenings and finding myself extra busy as to pass the time and earn the money to continue paying the bills. Thank goodness for LBC. That's a lovely thing to say, Richard, but I'm sorry that you find yourself in the circumstances that you describe, and that added dimension of being more or less completely ignored by politics is just bizarre, isn't it? What is the reasoning behind this? Oh, you don't matter? Or you're going to vote anyway? Or why talk about hardworking families all the time instead of hardworking people? There must be some psychology in play. I don't know what it is. Anne is in Dendermonde in Belgium. Anne, what would you like to say?
I'd like to point out that it's not a purely British phenomenon. We have it on the continent too.
Do you?
I think, yeah. Absolutely, and it's getting people, more and more people in who are single, like me, are getting fed up with it. And And I think there's an element for the Tories, at least, of cultural wars to it. The family nucleus, the 2.4 children, the ideal. If you don't have a family, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yes.
And the reason why they do it is both for Tories and Labour and the Lib Dems is that it's not a vote loser. So they're not going to lose any votes. It's not like you have a viable alternative, like for ecological matters, you would go to the Green Party.
Sure.
There's not a party advocating for single people here. It could be a vote winner because it's anecdotal, but we had here in Belgium, we had a woman who was on the list for the electoral list for what is our equivalent of the Lib Dem.
Right.
And she started saying that whenever there's a legislation put in place, there should be an assessment on what the impact will be on single families. So
yes,
either widows or whatever. And her vote share went up enormously during the next election. So it is a potential vote winner. So as to why politicians don't look into it, it's a bit of a mystery to me, because there's 1/3, in my country, it's about 1/3 of families. I don't think the figures are vastly different in the UK. 1/3 of families are single
1/3 of households.
Households.
Yeah. 30% of all households, 8.3 million people living alone. Millions of others, of course, will be in shared accommodation. So, you know, the numbers are really big, and yet you've got all of these politicians talking about the hard-working family. I mean, so if you are a member of a hard-working family, I don't think you notice it even. And yet, if you're not, you feel excluded. It's a very odd political play, isn't it? Very odd gambit.
It is.
And
I think it's probably that they haven't caught up. Well, as usual with politicians, they haven't caught up with society yet.
Childcare costs.
Yeah.
But that can apply to a single parent. So single parent, well, actually, if you're a single parent, I wonder whether you feel that a hard-working family is language to describe you or not, whether it would just be non-parents, single non-parents who are excluded. I don't know. But it's a very weird one, and it resonates most. One texter says it's terminology that resonates most with working class people. I don't know what that's based on. I don't know that I agree, but there's a calculation in here somewhere, Anne, and at the moment it is eluding all of us. It just seems a very odd phraseology. And don't forget, we're also looking at the penalties, really, the penalties, the costs of being single. My daughter's partner left her when their son was 10 months old, says this texter. He paid £800 towards bills before. Now he only has to pay £250 a month. So her dad and I are helping out with the deficit. She's an NHS nurse, and if we weren't helping her, she'd have to go on benefits. She works hard for her and her son and has to count every penny. She would rather work. She's cancelled Sky and anything else that she thinks is a luxury. And Martin suggests that this is purely about appealing to floating voters. But single people are just as likely to be floating voters, aren't they? I wonder if more family units may have more floating voters in them, and therefore a tendency to vote Tory as well. And that's from Martin in Hawley. I don't see it at the moment. Nikki's in Devisors. Nikki, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Before I forget, I'm coming to see you in Bath. Very excited about that.
So am I. Thank you, Nikki. Looking forward to it. Sold out, sadly, but anyone in Southampton, there's still a few tickets left. Carry on.
So I'm basically going to echo a lot of what Gary said. It drives me mad, this. So I'm in my late 40s. It feels like there's an assumption that anyone sort of in my age bracket who's single and has been sort of single probably most of their life, or just hasn't got married and had children, that there's an assumption that we've all had high-flying careers, we're all earning 60, 70k plus, got amazing jobs and have got no problems at all. Not all of us have. I had chronic fatigue when I was in my 20s and 30s. I was never able to build up a great income. And now I've got my own bookkeeping business. I get by. But
people think you've made a decision not to have a family in order to concentrate on money, on material things.
I mean, people around, my friends and stuff, they know what I'm about. But and this hard-working family thing drives me round the bend.
I can see why.
And even then, gym memberships are more expensive if you're single. If you go over,
are they?
Well,
because you can have a family membership or a couple's membership.
Well, so you can have a couple's membership, and it works out £5 cheaper per month per person. And I've had arguments with it's really unfair, and it's a marketing ploy, but it still penalises. And the council tax thing. Why is the council tax only 25% cheaper?
Well, it's a tax on a house.
Yeah.
Not a tax on how many people are in it. That was the poll tax. So I'm not here to defend it, but it isn't quite as unfair as other things might be.
Yeah, and the holidays thing as well drives me around the bed. I mean, it's £2,000 for a week's holiday away somewhere, and again, that's fine. I've got a few friends who are single, have great jobs, and they do that, and that's great.
Yeah,
and
but it's not. No, it is. It's very. So, what do you think? What's the calculation? Do you think then, Nikki, when they say we're hard-working families? What I mean, we're obviously missing something.
We are being ignored.
I know.
And it's silly because, as you were saying to the last caller or just before, the number of single people now in the UK has grown massively, hasn't it?
I think so.
And I just think they are, and this goes for all the parties. I will not be voting Tory. I am very much opposed to them. Probably why I listen to your show. But,
don't know what you mean.
I don't know what I mean either, James. But it's like we don't exist.
Is it about deserving? So listen to this. This is what Nesreen wrote today. Single people's invisibility is part of a larger, longer shift in politics towards proving that government is only there for people who deserve support. Families are more deserving than singles, and working people are more deserving than people who aren't in work, cannot work due to disability or illness, or do care work that is unrecognised and unpaid. So there's actually something quite sinister about it. You are being cast as someone who doesn't deserve help, and I, as a politician, am here to help people not like you.
It's like our opinion doesn't matter.
It is.
If we're single.
Well, it matters here, Nikki, and it will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. I'm a little bit embarrassed that I hadn't really clocked this before, that I hadn't noticed this myself, although my defence would be, I suppose, that I'm not single. Nesreen also quotes the Times columnist from Matthew Parris, of course, former Tory MP. It's always been a Tory message. He told the BBC in 2005, when the BBC noted the ubiquity of the phrase hard-working families in New Labour rhetoric, the idea of no free rides and no feather bedding. So it creates the idea that if you're not in a hard-working family, you're taking the mickey, you're swinging the lead, you're on the lam, you're getting help you don't deserve. It's a very, very weird thing, this. The time now is 12:31. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:35 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I nearly forgot where I was then, on LBC. And the conversation about singledom and politics is really, really interesting. And what's interesting about it is the difficulty of pinning down the reason for it, beyond Nesreen Malik's own analysis in The Guardian today, which is that single people are part of that section of society being cast as undeserving. And, I mean, she's pretty clear on who else is in that category. You probably are as well. You're talking about people that don't deserve help, and by talking about the hard-working family, you are identifying the people that do, but subconsciously or implicitly identifying the people that don't deserve support. Families are more deserving than singles, and working people are more deserving than people who aren't in work, regardless of the reason why they might not be in work. It's a pretty grim analysis, which at the moment I can't find fault with. Listen, she goes further. The worst sin of all is to appear to help someone who has been made unpopular in the public mind. Now, she lists immigrants, unemployed people and disabled people, but adds single people to that list. And having spoken to all of the callers today, I'm afraid I would have been reluctant to put single people on that list. But I'm not anymore. I think she's bang on. But that is directly as a consequence of having listened to your calls. The second worst sin is to dare to think of spending to reverse the damage that has brought all but the most privileged to breaking point. And so claiming to come up with solutions only for deserving hard workers and families becomes an alibi for this political dereliction. I mean, I can see that applying almost completely to the Tories, but it's doubly troubling to see Keir Starmer joining in. 12:37 is the time. Does it mean Labour won't be spending money to redress imbalances and injustices in our society, because the only people that need help are the hard-working families, i.e., arguably, often the least vulnerable members of society are the ones most in need of help, is the direction of traffic here. There's a couple of phone lines free if you want to add to this conversation. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Paul in Guildford says, you're assuming that both adults in the family work. I am when I talk about splitting the costs, but I'm not actually, because if you are going on holiday on one income, that's two people going on holiday instead of one for roughly the same cost. So it's still cheaper per person to be in a couple than it is to be single. But I take your point. He adds, when I raised my children, my wife worked at home raising our kids. We were still a hard-working family and we had 2 votes. Single people only have 1 vote. That could be part of it as well, albeit that there's no guarantee that 2 people would vote in the same way. Jack's in Herne Hill. Jack, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello, Jack.
Yeah, I mean, such an interesting article and a topic to talk about. But, I mean, for me, psychologically, I mean, okay, first of all, probably should get over the irony of me calling you and claiming to be a hard-working person when I should really be working right now.
But no one works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's no, you know, you either, you know, you're hardworking and you know that you're not, so you know that you are, but you're not the hardworking person if you're single that Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak are talking about every day.
And I wonder if there are 2 different approaches with it. The first one being a more of the nice sort of warm, fuzzy feeling, like everyone wants what's best for their families, or you know, when you think of family, it's not necessarily the people that you're living with, there's extended family and all the rest of it, and you want what's best for them. And so appealing to families, like, you know, if you're looking to vote, if you're a swinging voter, you'd be looking to vote for a party that wants what's best for your family as well. So maybe, you know, trying to capture we are the party of families is going to be appealing to a lot of people. So that's kind of one approach. But I guess the other side of it is the more sort of kind of leaning into cultural norms, I guess. That, you know, societally we're expected to, well, for many years was raised to, you know, expected to get married, have kids, and get a place together, you know, 2.5 children and a golden retriever, something like that, you know.
Yeah.
And so appealing to that ground is not only, you know, families come with, I guess, more stock in society. It could be argued, like they're more likely to own a house, they're more likely to they've got more people who can vote in their household. You do often find if you're raised like in a Tory household, you're more likely to vote Conservative, things like that. So I don't know if maybe... And so
Keir Starmer's playing on their pitch in a way when he joins in with this rhetoric. But I love the notion of well, I don't love it, I hate it. But in terms of intellectual engagement, I love the notion of dereliction here, because it's almost as if they're cutting loose a swathe of the population. We can legislate to look after some of the population, and therefore it will be hard-working families, because that is probably the most electorally advantageous constituency to focus on. But it actually means that implicitly the most vulnerable members of society are being completely ignored by this rhetoric, if not by the policies.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of, I think it's more problematic than they probably would have calculated, because you'd think that by saying hardworking, nobody believes they're not hardworking. Like nobody wants to admit they're lazy necessarily. I mean, I could be wrong there, but I think...
I mean, it'd be nice to take calls from people who admit they're lazy, but they probably can't be bothered to ring in.
That could be that could be difficult. So, I mean, it could just be ignorance.
What's your position? I know you're single, are you? Or
I mean, do you want my dating profile? Or?
Well, no. But only insofar as it's relevant to this conversation.
Yes. So I'm living in a house of multiple occupants. Yeah,
right.
Working creative single. So yes.
So what do they mean? So what do they mean when they talk about a hard-working face? It's so strange just to think that there are 8-point-something million people in situations similar to, well, that's households actually. Millions of others in shared accommodation, and yet, as this article says, you are absent from the political rhetoric and the major policy discussions about alleviating pain in the context of cost of living. It's actually madness, but it is. Had you noticed it before? I mean, is it one of those things that if you're in it, you notice it, and if you're not, you don't?
To be honest, I think it's probably the opposite. If you're inside it, you don't really notice. There's only when somebody sort of holds a mirror up to it that you realise what's going on. Like, you bring it up, you'll have something going, oh, hang on.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? A good penny drop moment. It's not unlike what we try to do on the show most days, but it's fallen to Nesri Malik to do it in The Guardian today. Jack, thank you. 12:42, coming up to 12:43 is the time. And I mean, it's incredible, really, because I'm normally very good at telling you who they come for next. I normally, because, once you allow the country of birth to be the basis upon which you decide whether or not someone is a valuable or a non-valuable member of society, then you leave the door open. So I told you that they'd be coming for the long-term sick, for example. I told you that not long ago. Look out for the attacks from this government on the long-term sick. There'll be attempts to frame them as feckless, attempts to frame them as dishonest, attempts to frame them as work shy, all of those things, because they want to reduce help, remove help. Labour aren't doing this, but the Tories obviously are, and they've piled in on it. And I could tell you which members of the public sector they'll come for, even if they're not on strike. But I've never once thought of single people. And they're not demonised in the way that the other categories that are listed in this article are actively and deliberately demonised. I think people with disabilities and illnesses are now in danger of being demonised. Actually, no, I think you are already being demonised. We know that immigrants are routinely demonised. We know that unemployed people are routinely demonised. I don't know that single people are being routinely demonised, but the rationale for ignoring them is the same. It is a notion of deserving and undeserving. And a single person is less deserving of government help than a member of a hard-working family. It's crazy business. Layla is in Great Harwood in Lancashire. Layla, what would you like to say?
Gosh, quite a lot, actually.
Hang on. Shall I come to you? Because it's actually, I've just looked at the clock. Shall I come to you after the break?
Yep, all right.
Is that all? Because it's 12:44 and 36 seconds, and I'm supposed to go at 12:45. I rarely do, but
I mean, this is a few more seconds being lost, so I'll come back to me after
it's
the break.
normally me that says that to the caller, but it's not actually. We're not losing seconds here because I've already decided that I'm going to come back to you after the break. So going to the break bang on time, which is still 4 seconds hence, would be close to a first for everybody.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:48 is the time. With no further ado, Layla in Great Harwood, what would you like to say about this? The purge, what is it? The persecution of the singleton, Layla.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's new. I think, do you know what, well, I'll start off with, do you know what arrow ace means?
Arrow what?
Arrow ace.
No.
Okay, so arrow ace is a sexual identity where you are aromantic, asexual.
Oh, I knew that. Yes, okay. If you'd spelt it, I would have known what you were talking about. Sorry,
right.
I didn't.
Okay.
I wasn't expecting that to pop up in this part of the conversation.
Well, because it does kind of link. Because arrow ace people are less likely to be in a relationship.
Sure.
And as an arrow ace person, you're more. I guess you kind of realise that the society is very amatornimative.
Yes.
Which means, like, we kind of expect to be coupled up.
Yes.
So because of that, and I mean, historically, single people have been villainized. Single women were often persecuted as witches.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
In Jane Austen's time, the term eighth leader actually, for a single woman, actually meant leading demons in hell.
Right.
So, but no, I think I've been aware of it since my very early 20s when the bedroom tax was coming up.
Yes.
And I was like, well, what about me? I live by myself.
Yes.
What's going to happen to me? And I don't think it's a conscious decision.
By the politicians?
I think that they are. Yes, there is a deliberate conscious decision to use the word family because family evokes children and it's the same language as, who will save the children?
Okay. But if you haven't got, so that might not alienate non-parents because you know, as you say, the general social sense of, looking after the children is a good thing. You don't feel alienated by that. But they're saying you're not hard-working as well.
Well, no, I don't. I live with my sister, so for me it doesn't actually consider that, but it's more the actual policies.
Go on.
Less the rhetoric that bother me. Because in terms of actual policy, I am often, there's everything to do with money.
Yes.
I'm automatically disadvantaged by. But when they start saying, we're going to give, if you have more than so many people in your household, you can get help to get, solar
put on your roof.
Yes.
And it's like, well, I can't. And I wanted to adopt, but I can't adopt because I have to have an entire year's worth of savings.
Right.
If you are, like, your entire annual salary in savings, if you were adopting as a single person. Not every council. This is a council I lived in before.
Yes, I understand. So what's the word we're looking at? It's discrimination then, really. It's a sort of quiet or a silent discrimination.
It is. It is a discrimination, and it's based on the outdated need for couples, because we did, historically, evolutionarily, it was better for society to have people producing children and being in
that's why,
safety.
why religions were so dedicated to supporting that norm as well, as sort of keeping the flock, keeping go forth and multiply. Yeah. You can't do that if you're not in a relationship, would be the logic of the medieval.
Yeah. And if you're individual, and like now we kind of live individualistic lives, so it's not even like we live in communities that are connected. We're kind of, if you're single, you're essentially on your own.
Yeah.
And
it's really odd, but when you look at the numbers, you make sense, and your description makes sense, but the numbers make a bit of a mess of the politics until you sort of think of it as being a salami slicing of the parts of society that we're going to bother addressing, and you can see the appeal of thinking, well, we can get elected even if we completely ignore them. And then, of course, it makes governing somehow cheaper. Maybe, I don't know. Layla, thank you. As you were speaking, this text came in, which I think speaks to some of the themes that you addressed. The cult of the hard-working family is a bit like the cult of motherhood, James. Our society is built on the assumption that everyone will couple up, i.e. grow up, want kids, and everyone will have them. Our notion of what is moral and what is the natural order of things, as well as our economies, will collapse in no time if this isn't true. Consciously or not, we punish people, women in particular, who don't validate the lifestyle choices of the majority and go against the grain. That's exactly what Layla was talking about. Choosing to have a lifestyle that doesn't leave you broke, worried if you can cover your housing, heating, food bills at the end of every month, is still seen as immature, selfish and worthy of demonisation. The irony is that by financially punishing singletons, you make them even less likely to find the stability they would need if they wanted to build a family. That's from JP in Crystal Palace. Beautifully put. Steve's in Beckenham. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Steve. I became single reluctantly because my partner passed away. My wife passed away.
I'm sorry, Steve. I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. So I'm now single.
Yes.
Essentially, it's only 3 months. It's quite raw.
Of course.
And so I'm not quite up with the economics of it, although it's obvious. Previous callers have said the obvious stuff. What was 2 is now 1, and and all that. But my main sort of point is the phrase "hardworking families."
Yeah.
And I think that the lady, your last caller, I'd like to touch on what she said. I mean, what is a family? Yeah. I have 2 grown-up daughters. One is she's in Peru at the moment, but the other one is gay and lives with her partner and has done for many years, and they have a child, beautiful child. And I don't think when Richie or Starmer talk about this, I don't think they're referring to them.
No.
I think that the idea of the family is mummy, daddy, and 2.4 children or whatever, and it's odd, and it's
a bit conformist, isn't it? It's got a touch of the family values to it from the 80s, from John Major's era, 90s, really.
But if I could just switch, if you look at what the family is in Dickens, for instance, there are no what we would call nuclear families. There's no mummy, dad. It's all fractured. It's all friendships. It's all...
It's a really good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah, clinging together. And this is from the Victorian age, from the writer who we, associate with family values.
And rectitude. But no, you're right. There are a lot more blended families than you would have expected.
So as for me being single, I mean, I'm still, as I say, trying to come to terms with it.
Yeah, of course.
coming home to an empty home, etc.
Yeah.
That's something.
And how does that phrase hit you then? That phrase, hard-working families, which deliberately excludes you.
It seems to, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
mean, it's as I think you reported earlier. That it's not new. I mean, Blair and Brown used it extensively, and I found it irritating then. I mean,
I missed it. I just missed it. I don't know why I missed it. But I mean, you just do sometimes.
I could be misthinking, but I think Thatcher might have used it as well. But I definitely remember Blair and Brown sort of. I mean, who I broadly supported, New Labour, but that irritated me.
It was there. I mean, it was. The BBC noted it in 2005, as this article by Nesreen Malik in The Guardian today attests. It was there. So you see it revived in the current party's tribute act to that era, is how she chooses to put it. It would not be so surprising. Steve, take care, and I am so sorry for your loss. I did not even begin to imagine the shock to the system that you describe and that you're going through. So do look after yourself. Sarah's in Brentwood with the last word on this. So it's going to have to be confined to about a minute, Sarah. What would you like to say?
Okay, I have experience of single parenthood, being single, but what I really want to talk to is the discriminatory HMO policy that the government is directly from the government.
This is multiple homes, people in multiple.
That's right. It used to be sort of 5+ people, but they've lowered the threshold through government policy, additional licensing, etc., down to 3+ people, which effectively excludes single sharers from 3+ bedroom houses or flats, because all the agents will come round to you and say, we don't deal with HMOs anymore. Just get a family. I'm a potential landlord and I've got 4 bedrooms. I wanted to rent to 4 sharers.
Right.
But the government policy means I can't afford it, because it can cost £10,000 to get the licence in, all the certificates.
When did they change it? I don't know anything about it.
It's additional licensing came in around 2019, depending on what borough you're on.
And what reason did they give for it? Do we know? Because there must have been a rationale behind it.
This is a discriminatory thing, that it's just all HMOs are bad because it causes problems in the area. But because they've lowered the threshold to 3+ people, that's 3+ bedrooms, but it's not so much the licensing, it's the planning, because the planning is so expensive.
I did say we only had a minute, and I'm afraid I'm not up with what you're describing to me, but it seems to be more examples perhaps, or more evidence perhaps, of the single person facing problems that are both avoidable and not faced by couples or by, quotes, hard-working families, end quotes. If you missed any of today's show, you can, of course, listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also rewind live radio and stay up to date with all the latest news from LBC. So rewind live radio on Global Player. Download for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom will be with you at 4, but here is Sangeeta Maiska.
James O'Brien on LBC.